Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I joined with the Prime Minister in commemorating the disaster of Aberfan all those years ago when 118 children died along with many adults at that time. Many in that community are still living with that tragedy, and they will live with that tragedy for the rest of their days. I remember it very well as a young person growing up at that time and watching collections for the disaster fund. I think the BBC documentary presented by Hugh Edwards last night was absolutely brilliant and poignant and serves to remind us all of what that disaster was about. Mr. Speaker, 1 in 4 of us will suffer a mental health problem. Analysis by the King's Fund suggests that 40% of our mental health trusts had their budgets cut last year. 6 trusts have seen their budgets cut for 3 years in a row. Is the Prime Minister really confident that we are delivering parity of esteem for mental health?
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman that, like him and my honourable friend, the member for Wellingborough, I'm of an age where I can remember those terrible scenes on television of what happened in Aberfan. I didn't see the whole of Hugh Edwards' documentary, but the bits that I did happen to see last night I thought were very poignant, as the right honourable gentleman said. And interestingly, actually, what it showed again was that issue of those in power not being willing to step up to the plate initially and accept what had actually happened. But obviously the result of the inquiry was very clear about where responsibility lay. In relation to the mental health services, it is right that we are introducing parity of esteem for mental health in our National Health Service. This has, we've been waiting too long for this. It's important that it is being done. But we are actually investing more in mental health services, an estimated record 11.7 billion, and particularly we're increasing the overall number of children's beds to the highest number of children's beds in relation to mental health problems. I think this is important. There is, of course, more for us to do in looking at mental health, but we have made an important start, and that funding is going to be there, as I say.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I had a letter from Colin, a family member of his has a chronic mental health condition, and he, like many others who've got relatives going through a mental health crisis, says this: the NHS is so dramatically underfunded that too often it's left to the underfunded police forces to deal with the consequences of this crisis. Indeed, the Chief Constable of Devon and Cornwall has this month threatened legal action against the NHS because he's forced to hold people with mental conditions in police cells because there aren't enough NHS beds. I simply ask the Prime Minister this: if the government is truly committed to parity of esteem, why is this trust and so many others facing an acute financial crisis at the present time?
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all say to Colin that I think we all in this House recognise the difficulty that people have when they are coping with mental health problems, and can I commend those in this House who have been prepared to stand up and refer to their own mental health problems. I think that's been a very important signal to people with mental health issues across the country. He raises the whole question of the interaction between the NHS and police forces. I'm very proud of the fact that when I was Home Secretary, I actually worked with the Department of Health to bring a change to the way in which police forces were dealing with people in mental health crises, so that we do see those triage pilots out on the streets. We do see better NHS support being given to police forces, so the number of people who are having to be taken to a police cell as a place of safety in some areas has come, overall I think it's more than halved, in some areas it's come down by even more than that. This is a result of the action that this government has taken.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is that nobody with a mental health condition should ever be taken to a police cell. They should be supported in the proper way. And I do commend those police and crime commissioners that have managed to end that practice in their areas. But the reality is, it's not just Devon and Cornwall that are suffering cuts. Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Trust has had a cut for every one of its last 3 years. And I also agree with the Prime Minister that members of this House standing up and openly openly discussing mental health issues they've had is a very good thing, because we do need to end the stigma surrounding mental health conditions across the whole country. But NHS trusts are in a financial crisis. According to NHS providers, it seems to be the worst financial crisis in NHS history. 80% of acute hospitals now in deficit. There was a time in 2010 when the NHS was in surplus. What's happened?
Prime Minister.
Remind the right honourable gentleman that what has happened in relation to funding of the NHS is precisely this. We asked the NHS themselves to come up with their 5-year plan. We asked the NHS themselves to say what extra funding was needed to deliver on that. They came up with their 5-year plan, led by Simon Stevens as Chief Executive of the NHS. He said it was £8 billion that was needed. We're giving £10 billion of extra funding to the NHS. And I might remind the right honourable gentleman that at the last election, it wasn't the Conservative Party that was refusing to guarantee funding for the NHS. It was the Labour Party.
Mr. Speaker, in 6 years the NHS has gone from surplus to the worst crisis in its history. £3 billion was wasted on a top-down reorganisation that nobody wanted. And yesterday, at the Select Committee, Simon Stevens made it very clear he doesn't believe that NHS England has enough money to get through the crisis it's facing. And so, can I offer an analysis from the Care Quality Commission, which seem to have quite a good grasp of what's going on? They say that cuts to adult social care, and I quote, translating to increased accident and emergency attendances, emergency admissions and delays to people leaving hospital, which in turn is affecting the ability of a growing number of trusts to meet their performance and financial targets. Will the Prime Minister also address the reckless and counterproductive adult social care cuts that have been made by her predecessor?
Prime Minister.
The right honourable gentleman quotes Simon Stevens, the Chief Executive of NHS England, at the time of the autumn statement last November. He said, "Our case for the NHS has been heard and actively supported." Now, the right honourable gentleman raises the whole question of social care and the interaction between health and social care. Over £5 billion extra was put into the Better Care Fund precisely to deal with these issues. Local authorities are able to raise that 2% of council tax to deal with social care costs that they are facing. But what is important is actually the health service and local authorities working together to ensure they are delivering the best possible service for people who require that social care. I saw a very good example of that at Salford Royal on Monday. I want to see more examples of that across the National Health Service, delivering for patients. We've put the funding in. His party wouldn't have done that. They will receive better care for patients.
We all want local government and the NHS to work closely together, but the problem is that local government funding has been cut. 400,000 fewer people are receiving publicly funded social care as a result of that. The NHS is having difficulty coping with the crisis they're in. Therefore, there is, unfortunately, bed blocking where acute patients cannot leave because there's no social care available for them somewhere down the line. The issue is the funding crisis in the NHS and in local government. The published figures by the NHS Trust show that the total deficit is £2.45 billion, but the Chief Executive says this figure may even be bigger. The government disguises the extent of the crisis through temporary bailouts, and next month they are bailing out trusts in a crisis. That, of course, is a good thing, but why are they in a crisis in the first place? Next month, Mr. Speaker, sustainability and transformation plans are going to be published. Many all over the country are quite alarmed by this because of the threat to accident and emergency departments. Can the Prime Minister deal with this issue now by quite simply saying there will be no downgrades and no closures of A&E departments in the statement coming out next month?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, over the course of this Parliament, the government will be spending over £500 billion on the National Health Service. That is a record level of investment in our National Health Service. But there is a key difference between the way that he approaches this and the way that I approach it. We believe on this side of the House that at local level people should be able to make decisions about the National Health Service, that decisions about the National Health Service should be led by clinicians, that it shouldn't be a top-down approach which is typical of the Labour Party.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Wow, Mr. Speaker. Well, top-down is what we got. And it cost £3 billion for a reorganisation that nobody wanted at all. Mr. Speaker, I started by asking the Prime Minister about parity of esteem. All this government's produced is parity of failure. Failing mental health patients, failing elderly people who need social care, failing the 4 million on the NHS waiting list, failing 5 times as many people waiting more than 4 hours at A&E departments, and another winter crisis is looming. The Society of Acute Medicines, I believe, has it right when it says this funding crisis and the local government funding crisis is leaving the NHS on its knees.
Prime Minister!
What has happened in the NHS over the last 6 years? More patients being treated, more calls to the ambulance service, more operations, more doctors, more nurses. That's what's been happening in the NHS. But let's just look at what his party's approach to the National Health Service is. A former Shadow Health Secretary said it would be irresponsible to put more money into the National Health Service. A former leader of the Labour Party wanted to weaponise the National Health Service. At every election, the Labour Party claims that the Conservatives will cut the NHS spending. After every election, we increase NHS spending. At every election, Labour claim that the Tories will privatise the NHS. At every election in government, we have protected the NHS. There's only one party that has cut funding for the NHS, the Labour Party in Wales.
Join the Prime Minister and the leader of the Labour Party in remembering the Aberfan disaster. Our thoughts with everyone affected by that. Mr. Speaker, thousands of innocent civilians have now been killed by Saudi airstrikes in Yemen. Can the Prime Minister give the House an assurance that those civilians have not been killed by Paveway 4 missiles partially manufactured in Scotland under licence from her government to Saudi Arabia?
Well, may I first of all congratulate the right honourable gentleman on his election as Deputy Leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party. Can I say to him in response to his question, as he knows, we have one of the toughest regimes in the world in relation to arms exports. When these allegations arise, then we have been pressing, I have pressed in the past, and my right honourable friend the Foreign Secretary has pressed the Saudi Arabian government to properly investigate these issues and to learn the lessons from them.
Angus Robertson.
I thank the Prime Minister for her kind wishes, but back to the subject of my question. It's beyond doubt that the Saudi Air Force is bombing Yemen, flying planes that are made in Britain, by pilots that are trained by Britain, and they're dropping missiles that are made in Britain. I asked her a direct question and she couldn't answer it, so I can try for a second time. Can she give this House an assurance that civilians have not been killed by Paveway 4 bombs being dropped on Yemen, which are partially manufactured in Scotland under licence by a government? And if she doesn't know the answer to that question, how can she possibly, in good conscience, continue selling them to Saudi Arabia?
Prime Minister.
First of all, in response to the right honourable gentleman, the point I made was a very simple one, which is that we press for proper investigations into what has happened on those incidents before we reach a decision or a conclusion on what has happened in relation to those incidents. We have a very strong we do have a very strong relationship with Saudi Arabia. That is important for this country. It's important in terms of dealing with counter-terrorism and a number of other issues. But what matters when incidents happen about which there is concern is that they are properly investigated.